Hello everybody, my name is Fortifier and welcome to episode 2 of the Retro Masterclass. Today we're going to be talking about the generations of gaming. We're going to keep it stupid simple, we're going to keep it pretty short. We're going to talk about all the generations and a few key facts. Now easily we could make this, to where I could do one episode per generation and it'd be very long, and I've already got that kind of planned out with Ready Go Gaming Show. That's going to be putting out a sub-series called Generations, but I figured, hey, let's go ahead and talk about the generations so you know what you're getting yourself into, right? You know what you're getting yourself into. We're going to be talking about the history, the companies, the graphical standards, as well as the collectability. So let's just hop on in and talk about the first generation of gaming. The first generation of gaming started in 1972 and ended in 1983. That's a very specific number, and there's a reason for it. In 1972, we saw the release of the Magnum Box Odyssey. In 1983 is whenever companies decided to shove their fucking heads up their ass. True story. So prior to the Magnum Box Odyssey, we had a bunch of gaming computers, and you had to use your imagination. There was really no graphical standard for these, games yet. It was just like, hey, plug me in. I'm a dot. Enjoy me. That's pretty much what you got. And that's, if you go to the older gaming computers, of which I know nothing about, I'm not going to pretend that I do, you can have a good time. But they were really big, they were clunky, many of them ended up being museum pieces or carnival fucks, I don't know. They didn't last around that long. It was more like experimenting, you know what I'm saying. Tennis for Two is pretty dope though. But anyway, Magnum Box Odyssey, that was the start, that was the landmark of everything that is video games. I like to call this generation the Pong generation. Some of the key companies that were really popular during this time included Magnavox, Epoch, Atari, Coleco, and Nintendo. And it's insane that I'm saying Nintendo because not a lot of people realize that Nintendo's first console was not the NES. A lot of people think, oh, gray box, first thing. No, it's not. It's not. It was the color TV game, which was supposed to be a licensed version of the Magnavox Odyssey, but Japan does Japan. They just do what they want. In terms of graphic standards, you had these fucking things. These are called the Devil's Pitchforks, but in reality, they're like VHF pitchforks, I guess. I don't know the proper name for them. All I know is that it tries to push this RF signal. You screw it in the back of your TV, and then, when the planets align, you get a crystal clear image. I've lucked out. Most of the time, I get very little fog. I can play the games fine. I have to use a weird method, though. And that brings me to some of the collectability things. Here's the thing that really sucks about the first generation. It's RF. And not all the consoles had the same connector. Magnavox had to be special and create a proprietary connector that looks something like this. And the only way for me to get it to work is to have the correct switch box or to wrap a fucking paper clip around it. You know how cumbersome that is? Alternatively, some companies were using RCA cables. If you don't know what an RCA cable is, take a look at your red, white, and yellow cables. Take a single strand, that's one RCA cable. Except back then they weren't yellow, they were just black. The Magnavox Odyssey 2, which we'll talk about in a little bit, has an RCA cable. So it's hit or miss. You'd see one or the other. Either way, RF can be very cumbersome. Don't let it get to your head. There are ways to work around it. I'm not going to cover it here today, but if you Google it, you will find it. Now, collecting things for the first generation is one massive redundancy. Why? Because they're all the fucking same. They're all Pong. Everything is Pong. It was always Pong. Literally, there are not 1, not 10, not 50, not 40, not 176, not 321, not 472, but 888 fucking consoles. And they're all the same. They're all versions of Pong, okay? Because in the 70s, you could just walk up to somebody in their office, steal their idea, say, fuck you, and go make money. That's what Atari did. And they got sued. They got sued by Magnavox, thus making Atari a licensee of Magnavox. But real talk, do not go out there and spend a lot of money on a first generation console. They are all the same. They're all Pong or derivatives of Pong or some bastard cousin of Pong. Some companies even had the audacity to release the same goddamn thing 7 years in a row. Isn't that right, Call of Duty franchise? Where'd you learn that from? The 70s? Grow up! But no, seriously, buy one particular console, give it a hug, cherish it, wax it, sniff it. It's all Pong. The second generation of gaming was from 1976 to 1992, which is a great year because it's the year that I was born. True story. Now at this point, a lot of things are changing. We're going from built-in games to no bullshit cartridges, right? Because this is the Atari generation. Atari had a fuck ton of cartridges. But there was a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes. Some of you might have heard of the video game crash of 1984. I think it's 1984. No! It's 1983. 1983. So the video game market crashes in 1983. Why? Well, everybody is creating their own console with their own unique games, with their own unique libraries. They're oversaturating it and let any crackhead from the street develop a game. And guess what? You oversaturate the market and the market crashes. Now, the traditional folklore in the video game community is that E.T. on Atari 2600 caused the crash of the video game market. I say ballyhoo. It's a little bit more than that. You can't just blame Atari for all your problems. But they did contribute. A lot of the games from the research that we did back in the day were getting marked down almost 75% because they just couldn't sell it. And what happens when you mass produce games and you can't sell them? You lose money. What happens when you lose money? You go bankrupt. And that's what a lot of the companies that were trying to push into the second generation did. They went bankrupt or they left the market. Some of them still are around today, but they don't touch the video game market because they don't know what the fuck they're doing. Speaking of companies, let's go ahead and take a look at some of the companies. And some of these companies included Fairchild, Atari doing its shit, Bally, Magnavox, which came out with the Odyssey 2, Mattel, yeah, Mattel made the Intellivision, Coleco, as well as Milton Bradley. For those of you who are curious, the Milton Bradley console is called the Vectrex. It's really cool. Imagine the console with its own built-in visual thing. This is what it looks like. Impressive, huh? So graphical standards, we're still using RF. Sometimes we're leaning towards AV, but the AV nowadays is just one single cable for video and one single cable for audio. Mono audio. We didn't have that high octane, high fidelity stereo shit going on right now. We had red and yellow, if that, right? Just red and yellow, or white and yellow. And you still see that with the NES. Now, I'm not going to go out on a limb and don't quote me on that because I'm pretty sure we were still in RF. My Atari is AV modded, so I'm kind of spoiled and it looks beautiful. And if you haven't done that shit, do it. Also, fun fact, Milton Bradley also worked on one of the first handheld games, if we're not considering Game & Watch, the Microvision, which was really cool. You just take the unit and you slide the game and you play the game. The game is its own screen too, is from what I understand, I believe. I've never seen one in person. They don't really last long. They rot away. It's just the way it was designed. So, second generation, Atari. That's all you need to know. Just buy an Atari. If you buy an Atari, you're probably going to get all the same games, and you're going to have a good time. Just, Atari's fun. Intellivision is also fun, but each of these consoles had their own issues. In terms of collectability, the Atari is probably the most cost-effective. If you go looking for a ColecoVision or Intellivision, you might pay a little bit more, but at this point, it's just the console that's costing more, not the game. The third generation was from 1983 all the way up to 2003. Pretty much after the crash was done, we started pushing towards recovery, making awesome games. The third generation has a few milestones. A, it's the start of the major console wars. B, it's when we finally decide that cartridges are a lot better than, some of the other bulky ones. We're starting to get smaller too. A lot of the cartridges for this generation are smaller. And that's basically it. We're in the 8-bit generation, right? So at this point, from this point on, we're going to be naming things after numbers because it's a race. It is now officially a race to be the most badass thing that we can be. Some of the companies that were popular were really only three. You had Nintendo, Sega, and then you had Atari. Shockingly, I don't know how the fuck Atari made it through, probably because they were handed off corporately from, person to person. They were there with the 7800, Nintendo with the NES, and then Sega with the SG-1000. However, you might not have heard of that, but you definitely heard of the Mark III SG-1000, which was known as the Sega Master System. That's the system that Alex Kidd and all this other, fantastic stuff was on. This is also the generation where we saw a lot of our favorite franchises starting. A lot of great franchises started thanks to Nintendo. Also, this is when we're like, holy fuck, education can be fun, and we're creating things like the Action Max and the VTech Socrates and the ViewMaster Creativision. I got one over here. It's on the floor. You can't see it. Here's the warranty information, just in case you don't believe me. Haha! ViewMaster! The people who made this thing. They made a fucking video game console. Everybody could do it, so why not? So when it comes to collectability, now we're not so much looking at the consoles, we're looking at the games. A lot of the games that you see that are expensive on these consoles were released near the end of their lifespan. For example, Little Samson, Chip 'n Dale 2, DuckTales 2. I'm making up games at this point. Little Samson's the most notorious. That and stadium events. Which brings us to our next point. And this is a pro tip from me to you. Please, for the love of God, if you are collecting games, especially expensive ones, and you're buying on eBay, make sure they take a picture of it open. A lot of people are scammers and will try to show you, images of a game that is A, either a reproduction that they're selling for a high price, or B, they're just outright scamming you. So make sure if you're paying for a game that's that expensive, ask them to get the little screwdriver, open it up. It's not going to harm the game at all. If you see wires coming out of that bitch, say, oh, fuck you, and then walk away. It's not that hard. Also, I want to take the time to discuss the concept of VGA. VGA being the Video Game Authority. Now, I'm not going to slander their name, but I'll explain to you the principle, and you can have your own judgment on what you feel. Basically, what you do is you send your game in the mail where it can be damaged, no matter how perfect the condition is. You send it in a box to these people who are the antique roadshow of the video game industry, and they look at it and they're like, my, that's a video game. Then they slap a little sticker on it that says near mint, put it in an acrylic case, and they send it back to you. Now you have a choice. A, you put it on the shelf like a good little boy because now you've got it in a case and it's utterly useless. Or B, you go to eBay and you try to sell it for $5,000! Don't be person B. You look like an idiot and nobody likes you. Don't do that. It's stupid. I will never buy a VGA rated game. I think it's dumb as fuck. I'm not gonna buy something I can't play, plain and simple. And that's the third generation in a nutshell. The fourth generation was 1987, yes, 3 years later, to 2005. This is the 16-bit era of gaming. This is where companies really started to piss in each other's Cheerios on purpose. I remember growing up and seeing the Sega Genesis commercials just rip a new asshole to Nintendo, making them look inferior and making them look like idiots. Remember? Sega does what Nintendo don't. Pretty fucking ironic nowadays, isn't it? How does that make you feel? So at this point, people are getting very, very ambitious. We still have cartridges, but we're starting to try to put things on this fancy new Frisbee that holds information that isn't the vinyl. It's called a CD. Compact disc, if you will. People wanted to do that. Who wanted to do that? Fucking everybody. Everybody wanted to do that. The major contenders for this generation would be Sega, Nintendo, SNK, and NEC. Now, you're probably wondering who NEC is. Now, NEC is this PC company, right? And they made the TurboGrafx 16, which still to this day is one of the consoles that lives in infamy from people not knowing what the fuck it is. True story. I don't remember this console, and I was alive during this time period. Never saw it in the stores, never saw a commercial for it. I don't know how people knew about it. Did they get it from a flea market? Now, the Japanese version, the PC Engine, was very popular. And guess what they did? They made a CD add-on. PC Engine CD. They did for the TurboGrafx as well. Sega had the Genesis. Guess what they did? They put a CD on it. SNK had the Neo Geo. And when they weren't fucking you out of every quarter you owned in your lunch money, they made a CD edition. And then the Super Nintendo came out, and guess what they did? They didn't make a CD edition. But they did make a broadcast satellite thing called the Satellaview. It was a flop. Cool concept, but it was a flop. And then why stop there? Atari, even though they had no console at the time, was like, let's make a handheld. They called it the Lynx. It sucked. The Game Gear, made by Sega. Awesome concept, 8 batteries, therefore it sucked. And then NEC made a Turbo Express, which again, never knew it existed, but essentially what it was is it would play the actual cards. It's a cool concept, expensive as hell. But what? I never knew it existed, never. And then the Game Boy came out, but everybody knows what that is. And that's pretty much the 16-bit generation. A lot of people were bashing heads. Games are expensive only if you're buying expensive games. Let's continue. The fifth generation was from 1993 to 2005. This is the 3D generation. Everybody in the 90s had to push towards the 3D. Some people did it well, some people did not do it well. Atari didn't do it well. And that's why they released the Jaguar, but we'll get to that in a second. So, for all intents and purposes, this is the 32-bit era of gaming, right? Plot twist! We're gonna mix it up with some 64-bit because fuck you! I gotta be better than you. I'm Nintendo and I'm better than you, right? Well, that's what they did. So, you have 32-bit consoles and you got 64-bit consoles. Here are the 32-bit consoles. The 3DO Interactive Player. The Atari Jaguar. Sega Saturn. PlayStation 1. The 32X. FM Towns Marty. Amiga CD32. So yeah, when push comes to shove, I wonder what's gonna win. The 32-bit console or the 64-bit console? Vote now on your phones! It's a trick question. The Nintendo 64 was better. A lot of gimmicks, but a lot of good games. Honestly, that's what it is. I mean, the 3DO failed miserably. If you're gonna name the console after your company, you're gonna have a bad time. The Jaguar was total shit, and it has one of the stupidest controllers I've ever seen on this planet. The Saturn was cool, so was the PlayStation and Nintendo 64. However, they are very different. We're talking about handling 3D at this point. Sega Saturn was the cream of the crop for taking an arcade game and moving it home when it wasn't on the Neo Geo. Neo Geo, they were kicking ass forever, and you know, it's a shame that SNK went under during this time period. But it's still really cool that the Saturn did a grade A job of bringing arcade stuff home. The PS1 didn't handle 3D that well. You know, you can fight me on that, I'll win, but they couldn't figure out terrain right. It's weird. Go back nowadays and play Tomb Raider and you'll know exactly what I mean. You might just be distracted by like the pyramid titties, but when you look at that wall and see it morph 30 different ways when you're turning left and right, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. Nintendo 64 did a very good job with it. Then you have this console that only plays porn games. I don't even know why the fuck I own it. And then also I mentioned the Amiga. Amiga is a Commodore company. Commodore is still trying to kick ass, but the CD32 was kind of like the CDI. It just really didn't fare well. But at this point, S-Video is right around the corner, and that's what's important. Collecting these consoles can get very expensive. This is where the consoles themselves are not going to be cheap, and the games are not going to be cheap either. 3DO, I paid $350 for. The Jaguar, I never see it anything less than $300, $400. PlayStation, $60. Nintendo 64, $60. True story, that's just the way it is. Saturn, I think I got mine for $80. But if you start collecting the bad shit, be prepared to fork out some money. That's just the way it is. Also, in the handheld spectrum, we had the Game Boy Color, we had the Wonder Swan Color, we had the Virtual Boy, which was a great idea. You can see, we're making progress. Next up is the 6th generation. 6th generation of gaming. This took place between 1998 and 2015. So now we're getting to somewhat contemporary stuff. This is the generation where Microsoft decided to come, breaking through the wall. Here's Johnny style with the Xbox, which is great. This generation is known as the 128-bit generation of gaming. Nobody ever calls it that. It's just contemporary stuff at this point. I don't think we're really going to name the bits, but just know that's a thing. Major companies during this time frame would be Sega with their Dreamcast, Sony with the PlayStation 2, Nintendo with the GameCube, and Microsoft with the Xbox. And at this point, it's survival of the fittest. We're not going out and we're not creating 30 different consoles anymore. We're not having that many unique libraries. We'll have some unique titles, but for the most part, we're going to cross-platform these titles to some capacity. PS2, very popular. Xbox, very popular. Halo was popular on one. Sly Cooper was popular on the other one. I don't know all of the individual ones because I'm still collecting and I'm still learning. I do know that the Dreamcast is single-handedly one of the most underrated consoles I've ever seen on this planet. Every single game I've played on the Dreamcast has been an absolute delight, and it was a shame to see Sega fall so soon. For those of you who don't know, during this time, Sega was in kind of dire straits. They put all their chips on the 32X and the Sega CD succeeding. They tried to keep the Genesis alive for too long, and ultimately that killed the console. And they were trying to compete against Atari, who had released the Jaguar, who if they had just waited like another year, Atari would shit the bed like they always do. And they'd have been out permanently, you know what I'm saying? But Sony, Sega, Nintendo, they still have a promising relationship, especially Sega and Nintendo. They like to cross-contaminate their ball sacks all the time and make Sonic and Mario at the Olympics! It's just something that they do all the time. True story. Also, we're getting to S-Video. We have S-Video. We're starting to slowly ease towards HDMI, the contemporary stuff. Game Boy DS was out, or Nintendo DS, I guess is the proper name for it. And things are looking good. We're starting to get some sense of identity on what kind of gamer we want to be and what system we want to be loyal to. I'm going to call this the fanboy age. Collecting this, not so bad. Dreamcast, kind of expensive. Xbox, not so much. PS2, not so much. GameCube, definitely not so much. GameCube is fun. You should definitely play GameCube as well. The 7th generation was 2005 to 2018. Doesn't seem that far back, does it? It brings me back. So this is our PS3. This is our Xbox 360. This is the generation where children discovered they could fucking argue in Call of Duty lobbies and insult other people's mothers. That's just how they rocked and rolled. That's what this generation was all about, insulting people's moms. This is the fuck your mom generation. At this point, we're looking at peripherals. We're looking at things that make us stand apart from the other consoles. We're looking at even more unique aspects. For example, franchises. For example, DVD playing abilities. Or in this case, Blu-ray. That was one of the big things they cared about. They're like, oh my god, Blu-ray player. Fuck that. I just want to play Dragon Age Origins, bro. Seriously, come on. And then the Wii was like, we would like to play with your wallet. Honestly, I think all of them played with their wallets. The PS3 had like 3 different versions, the Xbox had like 3 different versions, and the Wii had 2 different versions. I think it was the Wii and the Wii Lite, I think is what they called. Looked a lot different. But I think at this point you get the picture. You're not paying too much for the consoles anymore. Now you're paying for the games. Now we are at that golden standard of every game equals $60 no matter what you think it's worth. Every game is worth $60. Unless you go to GameStop. And honestly, that's not a bad way to collect. Going to GameStop and getting pre-used games, what's the worst thing that happens? You're $5 out of pocket? What are you going to buy with $5? Just crack an egg? And in the handheld spectrum, it's pretty much the same thing. 30 different versions of the DS, 400 different versions of the PSP. It was literally, how can we screw over the consumer even more and just get more money? That's what it felt like, at least. And that leads us to the final generation. The final generation is 2012 all the way up to 1 second ago. It's going on right now. This is one of the weirdest generations I've ever seen because for the first time ever, we have 2 sequels to each major company, Microsoft, Sony, and Nintendo, released in the same generation. You didn't see that before, except for the Atari 5200. I think that's the sole exception. So Nintendo Wii U comes out, the Switch comes out. 2 systems, 1 generation. PS4, now the potential PS5. 2 systems, 1 generation. Xbox One, Xbox fridge. 2 systems, 1 generation. And each of these had multiple revisions. I'll be honest with you, the reason I like old systems is because there's only really 1 of them. There aren't like 300 different versions. I mean, it's not always true. NES did have 2 versions, but the second version wasn't that popular. Same with Super Nintendo. Second version wasn't that popular either. Just stick with what you have, you know what I'm saying? But anyway, this is going on right now. We have HDMI, we have tons of games, we have tons of innovation, and Lord knows what they're going to bring next. Collecting for this, again, you're just buying it now. You can just go to the store and buy it now. And that's pretty much it. I hope you learned a little bit. I wanted this to be a very informal episode. I'm not going to do too much heavy editing. I just wanted to sit in front of the mic and tell you about each of the generations the way I wanted to. If you want something that's far more in-depth, just wait a few weeks to a month. We're going to be releasing Ready Go Gaming Show Generations, which will cover each of these time periods to a great extent. We're going to go pretty deep in terms of history. So thank you so much for watching. If you like what you saw, give me a thumbs up down in the comment section below. Say, ah! And as always, from my family to your family, good energy, good vibes, Fortify out.